And welcome back now to page 2 of Face the Nation. And joining us first, two new senators, both of whom have served in the House. Congressman from Arizona, Jeff Flake, now Senator Flake. He's in Phoenix this morning, and Connecticut Democrat Chris Murphy, who was also in the House before coming to the Senate. He is in Hartford this morning. Senator Flake, let me start with you. You heard Nancy Pelosi, you heard Mitch McConnell. It sounds to me like that we're in for more than the same. I don't think anything has changed here. Tell me I'm wrong.
Well, I'm not sure you are. It does look like we're going to have another high wire act or two here coming up. But I would have to agree with Mitch McConnell. I just can't see how the president goes back to the well on more tax increases now. We've got to cut spending. We put off the sequester, and the sequester is really only $1.2 trillion over 10 years. That's really just a start. We've got to do actually more than that, and we put that off. So we've got to cut spending now.
Well, let me, Senator Murphy, let me go to you. What, from the Democratic side of the aisle, what do you see happening here? Do you think that the Senate and the House are going to find a way to raise the debt ceiling? That's going to be the first hard vote. You've also got the what Senator Flake refers to as the sequester. That is these draconian cuts that go in across the board unless the Congress finds some way to resolve some of this stuff. What's going to happen here?
Well, listen, we've got to have a conversation about reducing spending. Jeff's right. There's absolutely no way to take a sizable chunk out of the debt and deficit without reducing spending. But we've also got to talk about tax reform as well. And I think that's what the speaker was talking about trying to remove some of these deductions and credits, which really don't fulfill good public policy goals and end up costing the country money. But we should have this discussion separate and aside from the debt ceiling. I mean, the legislative hostage taking just doesn't work. It doesn't work for the American people. It doesn't work for the world economy. And what I hope doesn't happen is that Republicans do what they did a year and a half ago, which is essentially hold the entire country's economy hostage to their demands. We need to have a reasonable conversation here, separate and aside from this issue of the debt ceiling.
All right, well, let's just round this out. We want to bring in some new House members who are actually, a couple of them are some old House members who are back. And just to kind of kick this around and see where it goes. Arizona Republican Matt Salmon was elected in 1994 as part of the Republican Revolution. He left to fulfill a pledge to serve only 3 terms. He's with us this morning. Also sworn in for a second tour this time around, Minnesota Democrat Rick Nolan. He was elected in 1974. He left Congress in 1980 and opened his own business. He's decided to come back, and also with us, Pennsylvania Republican Mike Kelly. He's now in his second term. He joined us on Face the Nation 2 years ago when he was first elected. And Congressman, let me just start with you. Last time you were here, you said you had come to Washington and you were not at all impressed with the way things were done around here. And some of the other people on the panel said, "Wait a minute, you're part of the team. You're part of the group now. You've been here now 2 years, so." You think you got anything done this first time around?
I think we got a lot accomplished. This is the first time in history of the country that we actually started about spending cuts. We started about reining in the size of government. So that was a huge win. Now, also, this last debate we just had, getting permanent tax relief to 99.3% of the American people was huge. And I go back to Chairman Camp has talked about tax reform, and we're talking about a tax code that's 10 times bigger than the Bible with none of the good stuff. We have to get serious about this spending cut and getting this trajectory of spending down. And if we don't, we are walking away from a pledge to the American people. And listen, I'm a Republican. Matt and Rick are with me today. But more than anything else, we're Americans. And if we want America's future to be bright, if we want America's future to be the future that we had growing up, listen, my dad was a World War II guy. He didn't want to go fight, but he had to. We're at a point right now where we have to address this spending in a really adult manner. And I keep hearing about we need to get more adults at the table. Well, you can get as many adults at the table as you want, but the conversation has to be an adult conversation.
Well, let's see what that conversation is then. You fellows were here before. Now you come back. You've had a chance to look at this thing from afar. What do you think they've been doing wrong since you left?
Well, honestly, I think that we've got to take the bull by the horns now. It's been 4 years under the same administration, and we've never even really opened a serious discussion about fixing Social Security and Medicare. And that makes me lose sleep. honestly, we deserve a lot better. Social Security will go bust within about 10 years. Medicare in 10 years, and then Social Security not far behind. And we have a moral responsibility. I have a 90-year-old mother that depends on that. We've got to fix that. And if we don't address these spending issues now, when Republicans have the leverage, then when? In the last 4 years, nothing's been done. There hasn't been a budget passed by the Senate in 4 years. $1 trillion deficits every year. If not now, then when?
Bob, you and others have talked about what's different between now and then. And I think that's a great question. This Congress worked 32 out of the 52 weeks last year. My first term, we worked 48 out of the 52 weeks. There's a couple things I think we need to do to change the process, to change the way we do politics. First of all, money has become too dominant. We went through $20 million in my election contest. That's toxic, it's obscene, and it's taking away from the time that we were elected to govern. Members of Congress now, to be successful, are expected to spend 30 hours a week in call time, dialing for dollars. That's time that we need to go to work 4 or 5 days a week, like the other people in this country do. Put the legislative process, the committees back together, have a process where things evolve and there's cooperation, collaboration, compromise, where you get to know each other.
Let me just point this out. We're talking about you need to get back to work. I never heard of anybody that got a job and the first 2 weeks they went on vacation. That's exactly what has happened here with the Congress. Senators, what do you think about that? That doesn't sound like a sense of urgency there. Everybody gets elected and, oh my gosh, this thing is just terrible. We got to do something, so we'll see you in a couple of weeks. What about that, Senator Flake?
Well, no, agreed. I'd love to get back. We talk about having a conversation. I think we've had plenty of conversations. We need to cut spending, and whether it's a framework that Erskine Bowles put forward or any number of frameworks or other reasons to just cut spending. I mean, we've got to do it. We are in control now in the Congress, but pretty soon we won't be. The markets will react, and we'll be looking like and acting like some of these European countries that have an austerity program imposed on them. We want to avoid that, and so I think it behooves us to get to work now.
All right, well, Senator Murphy, what's the first thing you ought to do then? What if you could just make a magic wish here and get something done, what's the first constructive thing that could be done here to get this thing going again?
Well, listen, I think we should shoot for that grand bargain. I think we should look at a deficit reduction, a debt reduction deal that's in the neighborhood of $3 trillion or $4 trillion. And I think the American people are where President Obama is, that they want it to be an equal mix of spending cuts and of some increased revenue coming in from people that can afford it. But let's be honest about this conversation about Medicare, right? I mean, Democrats put on the table $500 billion of Medicare spending reductions in the health care reform bill, and Republicans went out and attacked Democrats on it in the 2010 election. So Democrats have been willing to have conversations about spending reductions. We just haven't had a lot of partnership on this. I think there's a lot of common ground here on Medicare or Social Security if we're willing to put politics aside and come to the table. But let's get that big deal done early on. It gets harder to do as you get closer to elections. And if you really want to unlock this economy, if you want to make the United States the place where world capital comes to, let's do a deal and let's do it early.
All right, well, let me just ask you all this. They're talking about now, Senator Cornyn, in an op-ed piece yesterday in one of the Houston papers, said that Republicans have to be willing to say, yes, we're going to shut down part of the government if we can't get the kind of spending cuts we need. Is that really a good idea?
You know, I see no reason to shut down the government. Both sides agree that spending is a problem. So if we came here to fix things, then let's not polarize it right off the bat. Let's talk about the president agrees. He said we need to get spending under control. Both Republicans and Democrats agree. Now let's get started on it now. Let's start working in that direction. I think, you know, when you try to set up an obstacle right away, you create a problem. Now, I would tell you this, spending cuts have got to come in. And if our credit rating goes down, it's not because we didn't pay our bills, it's because we haven't addressed the future. And looking at a nation right now that is the trajectory of our debt, Bob, runs us off a cliff that's much bigger than the fiscal. Cliff. So we better get that under control. With the assets that we have, we can do it. It's there.
Nobody disagrees with that, but it's how do you get it done?
Bob, I'd like to interject maybe a little bit of a different thought,
All
because
right.
I was here during the government shutdown in 1995. It was a divided government. We had a Democrat president of the United States. We had a Republican Congress. And I believe that that government shutdown actually gave us the impetus as we went forward to push toward some real serious compromise. I think it drove Bill Clinton in a different direction, a very bipartisan direction. In fact, we passed welfare reform for the first time ever. And we cut the welfare ranks in the last decade and a half by over 50%. These are good things. We also balanced the budget for the first time in 40 years in 1997, 1998, 1999. And when I left, we had over a $230 billion surplus. This was with a Democrat president, a Republican.
So you think that's a good idea?
Yes, I do. I think
really
it's
do?
yes, I think it's about time.
Yeah, Bob, I think it would be terribly irresponsible. Every one of these dollars that was spent was approved by the Congress of the United States. And call me old-fashioned, I'm a businessman. You spend the money, you got to pay the bills. And the last thing we ever want to do is to essentially declare the United States of America bankrupt. That would just be terrible. It would be devastating. We can't do that.
Well, Senators, let me ask you, just yes or no. If it takes shutting down the government to get spending in line, would you be in favor of that, Senator Flake?
Well, it shouldn't take that, but we've got to cut spending, and we've got to use whatever leverage point. I would agree that the debt limit is not the optimal leverage point to use, but we've got to use everything at our disposal to actually cut spending, and nothing has worked so far, and so whatever we can do to cut spending, we've got to do.
Senator Murphy?
Yeah, absolutely not. I mean, there's way too many people in Washington who sort of just view this whole thing as a game. They're going to shut down the government, or they're going to abrogate our debt ceiling just to get what they want. Those things have real consequences. There are people that rely on those government programs. There's investment that doesn't come to the United States because of the fiasco that it creates. We should absolutely take the debt ceiling off the table as a leverage point, and a government shutdown off the table, and just stop viewing this as just political theater, and get down to solving the problem.
Let me just shift to something else. Senator McConnell said this morning he thought that this is the argument's going to take up about the first third of the Congress. Sure. But you've also got this gun issue out there. What's going to happen on this?
Well, listen, I think everybody's concerned about the gun issue. And there's more elements than just one element. In my lifetime, I've seen things change completely. When I was going to school, they used to worry about you chewing gum. Now they worry about you bringing guns into school. We have to address it the same way we've addressed everything else in society. We're much more vulnerable now for a lot of reasons, not just one reason. So I think when we talk about that, we need to look across the board what the changes could be that would protect the most vulnerable people in our society. Certainly, schools right now are very vulnerable. We have to do things to protect them.
Would you be willing, Congressman, to think about reinstating the ban on assault weapons?
Bob, what I'm interested in, I'm looking to see what everybody has to say right now. And once we get a chance to look at that, put it all out on the table, look at the framework is what's important. How are we going to protect the most vulnerable people in our society?
What about
Bob? Yeah, Bob, I grew up in northeastern Minnesota in forests and lakes, and I was like 19 or 20 before I had my first chicken and roast beef. I'm a hunter, believe in Second Amendment rights. But you know what? I don't need an assault weapon to shoot a duck, and I think they ought to be banned. And I think we need to put a ban on the amount of shells you can carry in a magazine, and I think we have to strengthen our background checks.
There's two things that I use to make decisions back
You're
there.
not pulling out a gun.
One is no, I'm not pulling out a gun. One is this little document, the U.S. Constitution, and the second is it going to work? And first and foremost, it doesn't pass the first test. I can't support anything that violates any of the amendments in the Bill of Rights. And I do not believe that impeding on people's right to bear arms is the right answer. So no, I do not support the assault weapon ban. I was here during the assault weapon ban. It happened in 1992. I was here for 6 years during the assault weapon ban, and I remember when the congressman from Columbine came into my office weeping, and we prayed together that day. It was a terrible time. That happened right in the middle of the assault weapon ban. Let's stop placating the American people and telling them we're doing something when we're really doing nothing.
All right, Senators, Senator Flake?
Well, Vice President Biden is coming forward with some thoughts, and I look forward to hearing them. And I think that Senator McConnell is right that debt and deficit are going to dominate the first couple of months of the year. And so that's the priority right now, is debt and deficit.
Senator Murphy, this latest thing happened in your state. What do you think needs to happen here? What do you think is possible?
Well, listen, I spent most of the last month in Newtown, Connecticut with those families, and frankly, the most important thing that happened on Thursday was not the swearing in of a new Congress, it was the fact that Sandy Hook Elementary went back to school. Let me assure the representative of two things. One, a ban on assault weapons and high-capacity magazine clips, the weapon and the cartridge that this young man used in Sandy Hook Elementary. It's constitutional, and it's also possible. Because we've done it before, and because this country has been transformed by this incident, and they know that if this guy didn't have an assault weapon, if he only had a cartridge with 10 bullets rather than 30 bullets, there would still be little boys and girls alive today. It absolutely makes a difference. It's common sense gun legislation. It's supported by hunters all across Connecticut and all across this country. And I disagree with Senator McConnell. I don't think we should wait 3 months to get this done. I think we should get it done now. And I frankly think that if we did that, it would save lives.
All right. Well, gentlemen, I want to thank all of you. You two, I want to congratulate you on coming back.
Thank you very much.
You knew what you were getting into when you decided to give it a second
Bob, but we're here to make a
time.
difference.
Mr. Toad's Wild Ride. We're going to have our own version of March Madness here.
All right. Well, it's nice to have all of you. Senators, nice to have you too.
Thank you, Bob.
Congressman. We'll be back in a minute with our analysis and round. Back now for a little analysis. Two of the smartest people in Washington. David Sanger is the chief Washington correspondent for the New York Times, and Rana Foroohar is assistant managing editor of Time magazine. David, I was very interested in the piece that you wrote this week when you talked about the impact that the fiscal cliff negotiations had on kind of the perception of this country. You talked to a lot of foreign policy experts. What did you come away from that, doing the research on that piece, feeling?
Well, Bob, I felt that at the end of the whole fiscal cliff drama that we saw, I think the world saw a Washington that still appeared to be dysfunctional, that hadn't addressed the major issue. Remember, the fiscal cliff was all about forcing Washington politicians to deal with the bigger grand bargain that you've been discussing through the entire show.
And the thing we should not overlook is it was something created by Washington. This was not the Japanese bombing Pearl Harbor. This was not something that happened, that came from someplace else. This was created here.
It was, and we forgot what we were trying to do. I mean, what they were trying to do in this was to actually solve these issues that would restore some confidence that the U.S. could go ahead in a leadership position. So what kind of weakness does that create? I think threefold. The first is there's a perception that the U.S. Is still having a hard time getting its act together. The second is, I think people around the world are looking and saying, is the U.S. prepared to remain engaged in many parts of the globe, even as it pulls out of Afghanistan or already out of Iraq? People aren't convinced of that. And third, the president has said a big element of his future strategy is the pivot to Asia, which is going to take time and resources. Not clear that's going to happen. What hasn't happened is investors are not fleeing from the U.S., and that's the best news. The question is, can you get through this next debt limit fight with that still in the case?
And Rana, talk about that a little bit, because you focus on economics.
Absolutely,
mostly.
and it's fascinating because if you look at what happened last time around in August of 2011, when we were having the big debt fight, you didn't see as much of a downturn in U.S. markets as you might have. In fact, 10-year treasuries actually rallied. But at that point, we were really benefiting from being the prettiest house on an ugly block that was the global economy. Europe was falling apart. The emerging markets were slowing down. The situation is a little bit different now. Europe is actually stabilizing. China, at least, is not going to have a hard landing. It looks like growth is continuing there. So I think that global investors may not be as patient with us this time around, and it really is the political dysfunction that they want to see corrected, because our underlying growth is actually pretty good compared to competitors like Germany, France, UK, Japan. We're doing better still.
Do either of you see anything down the road here when we get ready to vote on raising the debt ceiling that's not going to be just like what we saw in this thing on the fiscal cliff? Last minute, last hour, last day.
I'm sure it'll be last minute, last hour. It always is. The big question is, President Obama has said he won't negotiate within the limits of on the debt limit issue itself, that he'll talk about spending cuts elsewhere. Now, that was what he was supposed to be doing with this last fiscal cliff effort. Interesting to see whether or not he comes around to go do that. In the end, my suspicion is the debt limit will pass again, because the consequences of not doing it are so great. We already last time lost a bit of our credit rating just on the threat that it might not pass.
What about we heard one of the congressmen saying, well, actually, the last time they shut down the government, that was a good thing.
Well, you know, there are some disaster scenario arguments to be made. Some people feel that that's what it takes to really change things. I agree with David. We can't default on our debt, certainly. Most of the world's economy is run in dollars. That would be a complete disaster. It would be a Lehman Brothers times 10. And I don't think that we are going to do that. I am worried, though, that we may end up in a position where we're going to have to make spending cuts earlier than we should be given our growth. If you look back historically, not just in this country, but all around the world, when you go through a period like what we're in, you really want to have growth a little bit closer to trend, which for the U.S. is more like 3% a year rather than the 2% that we're in right now, before you start making a lot of cuts.
David, I want to ask you, because I know you follow this very closely, if all the signs are that Monday, tomorrow, the president is going to nominate Chuck Hagel, the former Republican senator, to be Secretary of Defense, and it looks like he's going to be in for a kind of a rough confirmation hearing.
That's exactly what it looks like, Bob, and to some degree that's something of a surprise, because the idea of appointing a Republican senator, in this case a decorated Vietnam War hero, was to have a fairly easy passage. But there's going to be a few issues for Senator Hagel. He is not on board with the president's strategy on Iran. He's voted against all of the major efforts to impose sanctions on Iran, or many of them. He made some comments about gays and lesbians that he apologized for a few weeks ago. He made them many years ago. The White House has said that they think that resolves the issue, but I think he's run into some opposition there. And then the pro-Israel lobby has been very, very active in campaigning against him. Republicans themselves, I think on your show, you heard some Republicans say they doubt that he's going to get many Republican votes.
Very interesting. Well, I want to thank both of you for a little helping us on all of this. We'll see what happens. And we'll be right back.